Alright, so in Chapter 2 of The Hobbit, Roast Mutton, Bilbo wakes up and notices the dwarves are gone, and he's kind of relieved, but then at the same time wishes that he had actually gone with them, and Gandalf shows up and basically gives him a little nudge, and so Bilbo goes and rejoins the dwarves, and they go on their journey. I'm going to read this passage here. At first, they had passed through Hobbit lands, a wide, respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling by on business. Hobbit lands obviously being the Shire. So we see that they travel through the Shire first. You notice there's a dwarf or a farmer that ambles by on business. Dwarves would usually come out. You had the east-west road, and that pass through the Shire, and the dwarves would go to and from the Blue Mountains, where they had mines and stuff. And that's why you would see them passing through the Hobbit lands. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now, when you look at the map and what we know when we get to Lord of the Rings, the only place is the Bree land that you really see where there'd be people all around, but hobbits live in the Bree land. So wouldn't Bilbo have noticed that? And again, this is something Tolkien didn't really incorporate into this, but when he originally wrote this had nothing to do with any of that stuff because Lord of the Rings hadn't even been written yet. Now, they had gone on far into the lone lands where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as if they had been built by wicked people. So now we are coming to the Weather Hills. And on the Weather Hills, there are old ruins of castles and stuff that were built there by the men of the Dunedain of Arnor in the past. At this point in time in The Hobbit, the Kingdom of Arnor is long gone. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly had been good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they had been obliged to camp where they could, but at least it had been dry. And then it says, down at the end of the page here, it talks about, somewhere behind the gray clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. This river being the Grey Flood, or Myth Aethel. Fortunately, the road went over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down from the hills and mountains in the north. And there is a bridge that passes over. If you look at the map of Middle-earth and Lord of the Rings. But anyway, those are just a couple things I wanted to point out here. There is one more thing to point out as they're going through here. Where was that? But yeah, they come to the hills, they see a fire out in the woods, so the dwarves have Bilbo go and check it out. At this point, of course, Gandalf has disappeared. He just disappeared. But here it does say that, they say, oh, we suppose they haven't heard of the king round here. When you get to the prologue in The Lord of the Rings, it mentions that is a common saying in the Shire. And I'm going to go to that prologue here for more context of that. That's right, I had it bookmarked. Boy. There remained, of course, the ancient tradition concerning the High King at Fornost, or Norbury as they called it, away north of the Shire. But there had been no king for nearly 1,000 years, and even the ruins of King's Norbury were covered with grass. Yet the hobbits still said of wild folk and wicked things, such as trolls, that they had not heard of the king. For they attributed to the king of old all their essential laws, and usually they kept the laws of free will, because they were the rules, as they said, both ancient and just. At the time that the hobbits had originally come to the Shire and founded it, there was a king in Arnor, and he granted them this land. And of course, the North Kingdom, as you know, fell, and the hobbits basically took this land for their own. But they still acknowledged the king, even though there was no king. Anyway, and the chapter ends, with, as you know, if you've seen the movie, they get captured by the trolls. Gandalf comes along, keeps them arguing until the sun comes up, and they turn to stone, because trolls turn to stone in the sunlight. However, Sauron had bred a special breed of orc called the Olag Hai, who would be able to endure the sun, but the only language they would speak is the black speech of Mordor. These trolls, of course, are clearly speaking whatever language the Hobbit is speaking, which is equivalent to English. Anyway, they turn to stone. They find their hole, their cave, and they bury some treasure that they're going to come back for later. And of course, Bilbo gets a little knife, and Thorin and Gandalf get swords. Swords that were not made by the trolls, but they're not sure who made them, so they're going to have that checked out. And so now they're going to make their way to Rivendell. So that'll be the next video. I'll see you there.